if excited is the right word for us to be using to be hosting an event like this, but I think grateful that we have the opportunity and the space to be able to have these conversations. I really thought and toyed a lot with like, how do I start? And I was between reading a poem, I'm going to be honest and vulnerable here, or just sharing my thoughts. And I think I'm just going to share my thoughts with all of you because I'm feeling kind of this amalgamation of emotions, and it is because I am so proximal to what's happening. And so I think I'm going to share some of that with you. I feel like this heavy responsibility to really represent and convey a reality and humanity that seems to be missing in a lot of spaces, especially in our country. I feel a really heavy like sadness and grief, and kind of this weight of having to mourn in private because we don't have the privilege of mourning in public and being able to share our feelings without being ostracized or without being dehumanized or demonized. I feel a fear, I think, over how my words tonight and my words historically, whenever I have spoken about Palestine or spoken to Palestine or shared my family's legacy and lived experiences, have been weaponized against me and decontextualized in ways that have been harmful and divisive in professional spaces or in educational spaces. I feel tons of gratitude for my colleagues and that are here tonight who have taken time and are invested in really doing social justice work and equity work and have taken the opportunity to spend time planning this and showing up here. I'm grateful to all of you, almost 1,200 people who registered to be here tonight to have this conversation. And I feel like I am channeling all of that and hopefully trying to muster up the courage really to represent and to speak and to do my part here as a Palestinian in a country that affords me somewhat, right, the freedom of speech, but at the same time is supporting politically and financially the things that are happening in Palestine today. And so I'm hoping that we together can come up with and have these conversations that will really work to change the status quo. And so I'm not going to take any more time from that, but just kind of channeling all of that and hoping that everybody in the space takes something away from this conversation and walks away with curiosity, with more questions, with a resolute feeling of wanting to do something, right? Like I always ask my students, now that you know, what are you going to do with what you know? So hopefully we'll be able to share some things with you and you can walk away with some action items to take back to your spaces. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Ijeoma.
Hi, everybody. It's an honor to be here and to share this amazing space with these amazing people. I wish it was under better circumstances, but still, community is always what holds us together and keeps us human. And as we get started, I want to share some acknowledgements and agreements that we are moving forward with in this webinar. So, first, we acknowledge that we are giving this presentation on occupied lands, land stolen from Indigenous and First Nation peoples in what is now called the United States and Canada. The governments of these nations have provided substantial financial and political support to the Israeli occupation of Palestine and Indigenous Palestinians, as the occupation serves their own colonial goals. The occupation of Palestine and the oppression and persecution of Palestinians that began before 1948 and continues to this day has led to devastating violence that has claimed the lives of thousands of people. Since 2008 alone, over 18,600 Palestinians and 1,500 Israelis have died. We mourn every one of these deaths and recognize the deep pain and fear this has caused to both Palestinians and Israelis. Palestinians throughout the entirety of the Israeli occupied territories, that's Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel, have been subject to abuse, imprisonment, discrimination, and violence under the Israeli apartheid system. We acknowledge that weaponry, surveillance technology, and combat tactics developed by Israeli forces and used against Palestinian populations are being exported around the world and used against Black, Brown, and Indigenous populations around the world. The actions of the Israeli government and military forces do not represent all Jewish people or even all Israelis. We recognize and have deep appreciation for anti-Zionist Jews who have, even in times of great pain, placed themselves in the front line of protests and collective actions in the service of liberating Palestine. We hear their demands that this occupation, ethnic cleansing, and genocide will not be carried out in their names, and respect the deep costs they often pay both personally and professionally for doing so. And being in this space, we agree that all presenters and attendees will refrain from using language that is racist, anti-Islamic, anti-Semitic, sexist, or ableist. And should we err and use language that causes oppressive harm, we will be accountable for that harm and seek to repair it. Conversations in the chat of this webinar will be productive in nature and should be primarily used for clarification and questions. This conversation is centered around occupation, ethnic cleansing, and genocide currently being carried out against Palestinians. You have entered this conversation because you want to better understand what is happening, how to discuss it, or how to help fight this devastating violence. These conversations can be very painful and difficult. You may find yourself feeling defensive or even indicted by this conversation. By choosing to stay in this webinar, you agree to find a healthy way to process and address those feelings without monopolizing the webinar chat and this important conversation in order to do so. Our liberation is connected, and so is our oppression. We all, as human beings, have an obligation to stand up against oppression whenever we encounter it and hold all those who uphold this oppression accountable. And those of us whose identity, nationality, or tax dollars are used to justify or support oppression may feel especially called to speak up against it. It is not anti-Semitic to criticize the state of Israel or its actions, or to call out the injustice of the occupation of Palestine. We must always be willing to call out states, systems, and other power structures for their abuses. And with that, I will pass to Shane.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Sosen and Ijeoma, for opening up the space so beautifully and heartfully and clearly. I'm feeling a lot of gratitude as well for being here and a lot of emotion, and I'm going to try to channel that into the conversation that we want to have with you all tonight. Sosen asked me if I would start with a moment of mindfulness. And so before we begin the panel and kind of inquiry part of our time together, I want to invite you to really pause. And in the tradition of Irish blessings as described by the late poet John O'Donoghue, I have lit a candle to really call all of us into our wholeness tonight, to really remind us of our shared humanity in these painful times. And if it feels comfortable, I would like to invite you to close your eyes or find a soft gazing point and just take a couple of deep breaths to arrive here with us. And as you breathe more slowly, to really notice your body in this moment, in time and space, to reflect on what it means to be here together, to be alive and connected to the other human beings in this room and to all other human beings on this planet. To commit to care for one another and to listen deeply to one another. And as you continue to breathe and feel yourself grounded in this moment, I want to invite you to consider for just a moment, what does it look like? What does it feel like when there is true peace and justice? What arises in your heart? What arises in your vision when you think about true peace and true justice? Some of the images that come for me are children awakening to the smell of fresh bread rather than smoke. Children awakening to the sight of clear skies, not bombs or white gas. Children everywhere being gently held by their mothers and fathers rather than needing to hold on to them for dear life. children and all civilians enjoying freedom of movement, freedom of thought, freedom of speech, and the freedom to simply live and breathe and walk with dignity. And as we can imagine this world, we can also let our hearts break today at the distance from now. We let our heart breaks, as the poet Andrea Gibson says, so that our spirits will not. Our spirits will not be broken. And with your next breath, I want to invite you to just open your eyes and come back. Kind of notice what arose for you, especially in that vision. And if you would like to share in the chat something you saw when you envisioned true peace and justice, I would love to hear from you. What came into your heart and your imagination when offered that prompt? Thank you, Jen, for starting us. Love, quiet, peace, brightness, play as a human birthright for all. Beautiful. No worries, smiles, nature, friends laughing together, Palestinian children running freely in a field. No more borders, shared prosperity, thriving in community, the innocent smiles of children, everyone holding hands around the world. Clean water and flowers, love and joy, no borders, standing in solidarity and community with one another. A child holding up a hand and being able to halt violence and destruction and hate in its tracks. Collective liberation. Thank you, Ken. Just the free flow of creativity and ideas of love. Calm, sun shining, children playing. This is really beautiful. Malak being able to walk through my village, finally experiencing the true freedom of Palestine in all its beauty. Nourishment. I think I'll pause there and just thank you all for sharing and for walking through that vision with us. This is really why we're here, to try to build and manifest this world and to listen and learn together. So thank you for joining us tonight. I'm going to turn to my friend Joe to start off on sort of why each of us is here and our relationship to this moment.
Thank you, Cheyenne. Welcome everyone who's joining us, whether now or later. It's a blessing to be able to connect with you all and be in community. We're all going to share a little bit of what brings us here, who brings us here, and who are we. So I'll start. My ancestors bring me here. My ancestors call me to be in the moment, in this moment. And my ancestors paved the way for so many things. And I wonder what my ancestors would want me to do. And I'm pushed by that question. And I try to live towards that answer, right? Of where do my ancestors call me? Who am I? My name is Joe Truss. For today, I'll introduce myself as a father of 3 children, living in this land that we live in here. What I'm bringing to the space is humility, empathy, but given the conversation that we're having, a lot of privilege, a lot of opportunity, privilege to not be living, trying to survive a war, privilege to talk about this instead of to be in it and literally, physically be in it. And that also calls me as to what I'm bringing and how I'm bringing it. What do I do with the privilege that I have as an individual? And what do I do with my positionality, the access that I have, the conversations that I get to have? And what do I do when I'm told there's conversations I'm not supposed to have? What do I do with the privilege of still being able to decide whether I have that conversation or I don't? Whether I conform or I don't conform. And the last answer I'll give is what caused me to be here is my children. I got 3 children, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 6-year-old. And, you know, I wonder the questions they're going to ask me when they're old enough to be able to ask me, what were you doing, Dad? Right? I'm accountable to them. I'm accountable to a lot of people, but I know it's going to be a time when they ask me, hey, what were you doing when it was going down, when the shit hit the fan? What did you say, right? Where did you stand? So I'm trying to live up to my ancestors and trying to live, right, 7 generations behind, 7 generations ahead, right? I'm hoping to help it along the way. So appreciate being here. Happy to be here. And I'm going to pass it back to Sosan.
I'm such a hot mess right now. Why am I here? My ancestors, right? Like it's the first thing I could think of. I owe it to my grandfather, who's a Nakba survivor, right? I owe it to my great grandmother, who watched her kids being killed in 1948 when our village was completely massacred, and my grandfather was one of the few survivors. I owe it to my parents, who are Nakba survivors, who came here as refugees, who did everything in their power to try to preserve the Palestinian identity and make sure we knew where we were, who we were, and where we came from, and who taught us that our liberation was only going to be in our education, and that we could never stop trying to elevate truth, right? And trying to elevate justice, and justice for everyone, not just for Palestinians. I'm here because I feel survivor's guilt, why I'm here and not there. It could have been us. I watch the kids and I see my own children and every child that's there. And I feel like so conflicted at being an American and being a Palestinian at the same time. It's so difficult to know that my tax dollars and my government and so many of my colleagues and people that I work with are for the genocide of my people, and that even in structures and systems that I've dedicated 25 years of my life as a professional, we have all contributed to the genocide that's happening now, explicitly and implicitly. And so I feel like this is the least that I could do. And that comes with a lot of different things, a lot of different pushbacks and reactions from the people around. But I feel like this is the least that we could be doing. I'm here because if I'm not here and we are all allowing this to happen, I'm scared of what precedent that sets internationally for us in the world. It's scary. It's scary to think about what this could mean. It's scary to think about the green lights that we are sending out and what we're saying is acceptable and allowable in the future. And just thinking about the fact that, you know, when we allow it to happen, I always say if we all fought back and spoke up with the indigenous people in America being marginalized, with the Black community being marginalized since 1619, we probably wouldn't be here talking about Palestine. We probably just wouldn't. And so if we're not talking about Palestine, what are we paving the way for? Because we've been here before and we'll be here again, right? And I'm here because I believe in teachers and I believe in educators and I believe in educational structures to be disruptors and to really, really change the status quo and to shape and craft students and kids who are better than us and better than this and can really know better and ask the critical questions and be curious. And I believe in school systems in both harming, becoming tools and weapons at the same time. And my hope is that everybody in this space will go back to both their locus of control professionally and personally and really just make the changes. Because when you're an educator and you have a locus of control with educational institutions and organizations, I always say you educate a teacher, you're educating an entire village. Our touch points are so many. And our reach is so far and our locus of control is so wide that we have so much power to really shift these narratives. And we have historically done so much to replicate and cause harm here. And so I have faith. I have faith in this space and the power that this space can hold in order for it to really shift this narrative. So that's why I'm here. Now I'm going to pass it back to Ijeoma.
I'm here first and foremost as a Black woman, as a Black queer woman. I know in my lived experience, I know in my bones what oppression looks like. I know what genocide looks like. And I'm called to fight it wherever I see it. I am part of a long line of history of solidarity between Black and Palestinian communities, because I know, just like many other Black and Indigenous people, especially, and Palestinians know, that as long as these systems stand, we are all at risk, that our oppression is linked, but so is our liberation. And I see family in Palestinians, not only because I literally have Palestinian family, and I'm absolutely here for my cousins and my uncles as well, but because we are beautiful people who have created amazing, vibrant, loving culture in the face of such devastation. And I know what it feels like to be demonized. I know what it feels like to have your history erased. I know what it feels like to make people afraid of you in order to justify your exploitation and abuse. And as an American, I feel that I have no choice but to speak out because my tax dollars are being used and because the myth of American security and prosperity is being used to justify this violent occupation. It's something that we must fight. And it is not just theoretical that this is connected. I see every day how technologies from Israel are used against the Black community. Technology like ShotSpotter. We see cops going to Israel to be trained on how to brutalize our communities. We are seeing links between the ways in which Israeli armies are being taught to infiltrate Gaza and terrorize Gazans, used to develop Cop City that is currently being built to terrorize Black Americans in Atlanta. It is all connected. And that is why all of these powers are working together to try to stop us from speaking out, because they understand that what they are doing helps each other. And they understand that us speaking out and any of us becoming aware is a threat to all of them. And I firmly believe that the vast majority of people, when made aware, would not want to be a part of this. That's why I do this work. And I believe that because of how hard they've been targeting information and sharing and discussions like this one. And so that's where I start. And that's what I want to have. I want us to be made aware of what we are being asked to sign on to and what our ignorance is being asked to be a part of. And once you know, you can't unknow. So my goal is for everyone here to have their eyes opened a little bit more, to be a little better armed in their discussions as they go out into the world and try to help other people see that we have to stand together against this, and all of our futures depend upon it. And I'm going to pass to Shane.
Thank you, Ijoma. So my name is Shane Safir, and I'm here as an educator, a mother, a daughter, and a co-conspirator in the fight for Palestinian freedom. I'm also an American of Jewish and Irish descent, whose last name Safir is both a Hebrew and an Arabic word. I come from a long line of secular Jews on my father's side, and I also stand inside a long legacy of Jewish solidarity and organizing for human and civil rights. And I'm very proud today to witness the largest mass mobilizations of American Jews in U.S. history who are saying, not in our name to this genocide. And I'm deeply moved by the courageous leadership of Palestinian activists and all of the solidarity actions that are happening across the globe, led by Black and Indigenous and Asian Pacific Islander and so many other allies. We can't let the powers that be convince us otherwise. The vast majority of us, as Ijoma already said, are united in our call, not just for a ceasefire, but for freedom and justice for Palestinian people. That's why I'm here. My relationship to Palestine really began most pointedly in the fall of 2010 when I had the privilege to teach in Amman, Jordan high school, a country that has more than 2 million Palestinian refugees. And many of my students were from the occupied territories, and I was teaching English 11. And they wrote about their experiences growing up under occupation, about the constant feeling of second-class citizenship, about the presence of Israeli military in their streets, about the endless border crossings and how hard it was to visit families, and the longing for freedom. And I carry those stories into the space today. Two of my students from Gaza that I remain in touch with wrote autobiographical pieces about the 2008-09 war on Gaza that happened when they were in 9th grade. And they were sitting outside like teenagers taking selfies when the sky exploded into bright lights and they had to run for shelter because Israel was dropping bombs on their neighborhood. As the writer Ta-Nehisi Coates said recently in an interview on Democracy Now! That I imagine a lot of you saw, from the American media, one would think you have to have a PhD in Middle Eastern studies to understand what's happening right now. But the truth is, in his words, it's really neither complex nor complicated. Israel exists as a segregated society in which Palestinians lack basic human rights, and what's happening now is a genocide, full stop. And I understand this not just intellectually, but in my heart and spirit, because I had the opportunity to spend time in the occupied territories. So I'm here today holding this space because I believe that every human life matters, that we can mourn the loss of all civilians. It's not a zero-sum game, just as we decry the disproportionate impact right now in Palestine and Gaza. And I think the last thing I want to say is that we need to not stop talking about this. I'm hearing from teacher friends all over that they're being asked to not talk to students about what's happening. They're being asked to not talk to each other about what's happening. That's a travesty. It boils my blood to think that that's the message we're giving young people. Don't talk about this. So we're not going to stop talking to each other until every child is free, until occupation is ended and an equitable vision is manifested, until every human life is held sacred, until we've recreated the world in which no human life is disposable. And I'm just really honored to walk alongside everybody here toward that vision. And pass it back to you, Joe.
All right. Thank you, Shane. Our next question, I'm going to pass it to I think we're going to pass it back to you, Shane. Or were you starting with anti-Semitism versus anti-Zionism?
I think we were going to start with that. Yeah.
Okay. So let's start with some
lead on that one.
terminology.
Yeah. And I'm going to start this, Shane and I had discussed, with a little bit of a personal story here, because there's a lot of discussion right now and people are really afraid to speak out because people are being accused of anti-Semitism for even daring to critique what is happening. And so I want to say first, anti-Semitism is absolutely on the rise throughout the United States, and throughout the world. It's part of a global rise in white supremacy. And it is on the rise throughout the West, where I live. There are hotspots of white nationalist spaces being built in Eastern Washington, Idaho, Montana, Utah, where well-armed white supremacists are gathering and targeting Jews, people of color, trans people, and my family has absolutely been targeted by them. In 2019, some of you may know, my family was targeted by a neo-Nazi group who found our address and pretended to be my then 17-year-old son and called the police saying that he had a gun and had murdered me and my partner. And that action sent 6 police officers at 6 o'clock in the morning with loaded guns to our door, expecting a young Black man with a gun. This group was also responsible for sending swastikas to Jewish journalists, to targeting journalists and politicians of color across the country. That group itself was broken up by the FBI, but certainly those elements remain. Certainly we were not made more safe by these actions. And for years, we suffered a lot of abuse and harassment and had to move out of our home. I say this because it is important to understand that we absolutely take anti-Semitism seriously. And we take it seriously and recognize where it comes from. And it comes from violent white supremacy. And so with that, I'm going to read some of these slides that come from the Jewish Voice for Peace that they posted on their Instagram a few days ago. Why is it dangerous to confuse anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism? At a time when white supremacists and white nationalists take advantage of this moment to sow confusion and promote anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and I'm going to make a side note here because some people do not like the term Islamophobia, and instead anti-Islamic hate is more appropriate, and racism. Misstating what anti-Semitism is harms all of our work for justice and endangers our communities. Opposition to the political movement of Zionism and or the policies of the State of Israel is no different from criticism of any other political ideology or policies of any other nation state. But the Israeli government, US government, and anti-Palestinian organizations run campaigns to redefine the meaning of anti-Semitism, aiming to falsely conflate it with criticisms of Israel or Zionism. They do this so the Israeli government can avoid accountability for its policies and actions that violate Palestinian human rights. Warmongers try to make it hard, but it's actually really clear and simple. Fighting for Palestinian freedom and against anti-Semitism are intertwined, and we are deeply committed to both. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Joe, I believe, or Shane. Shane.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I don't have a ton to add here. I think just underscoring the need to uncouple these things. There's so much confusion out there right now, and it really is a silencing tactic, right? It's a divisive, divide and conquer silencing tactic. Apparently the ADL this week put Jewish Voice for Peace on the anti-Semitism, hate group list. And it's like, as a person of Jewish descent, it feels distorted, deceptive, and dehumanizing to constantly align any critique of Israel with anti-Semitism. I know that my ancestors would not stand with that. I'm carrying them with me into this space, and we can both oppose Zionism and love Jewish people. That those are not opposing forces. So I think just to continue to educate ourselves around this, we're going to share some resources a little bit later, some articles for you all to read, and to be willing to say that, these things are not the same. They're not one and the same. Joe or Sosan, do either of you want to add to this piece?
No, just to explicitly just highlight too that the ADL is legally trying to change the definition of anti-Semitism in the United States to include criticism of Israel. And so those are things that I think as voters and as we kind of are always looking at elected officials and kind of elected officials are making statements and things like that, we have to hold them accountable to supporting things like that. And those are definitely a direct threat to our First Amendment rights in every possible way. And these laws that exist to protect Israel don't even exist to protect America in America. So it's absurd to me that a lot of these things sometimes are happening under our watch, and we oftentimes don't even know that it's happening. So just to be really aware of that's explicitly becoming a law, not just a spoken word and a label.
And I'll say a thing, and then I'll pass the next question to you, Sosan. This piece of starting with terminology and addressing misconceptions is critical, right? We're starting here because we want to be clear with what frameworks, what concepts, or vocabulary we're using so that we can engage in a proper conversation. So when we think about how we move this out to have these conversations in lots of other places, we want to be sure that we don't skip that piece because everyone's not pulling from the same set of information, and they could be pulling from misinformation. So I appreciate starting here, and as well as starting with history and context, which takes us to the next question. Passing it back to Sosan and Ijeoma. What do you want to share about where the history of Palestine begins, or what will we pull from the history that informs the moment of today and how we talk about it?
Ijeoma, do you want to take this first part and then I'll take over? You're muted.
Thank you for that. It is really important to understand that right now people are really trying to erase a lot of the history of what has been happening in Palestine to try to make it seem like this quote unquote conflict, which is actually a genocide and ethnic cleansing, began October 7th and not 2003. Sorry, 2023. Typo. But I wanted to share some of the history with y'all, and Susan and I will be sharing that. So it's important to understand, in 1917, the UK Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour penned the Balfour Declaration. And the declaration, you can read the text on the right here, basically said that they wanted to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine. It's important to understand that this was done not with great intentions toward the Jewish people. Balfour himself was a known racist. There are quotes here from him saying, "We have to face the facts. Men are not born equal. The white and black races are not born with equal capacities. They are born with different capacities, which education cannot and will not change." And he was also anti-Semitic. He gave fervent speeches trying to limit immigration, especially Jewish immigration, into Britain. And he really thought that Zionism could solve the quote unquote problem of Jewish people in Britain. And he said it would, quote, mitigate the age-long miseries created for Western civilization by the presence in its midst of a body which it too long regarded as alien and even hostile, but which it was equally unable to expel or absorb. And it's important to understand that this language is throughout the creation and the conversations around the creation of Israel, that this would be gifted to Jewish people as, payment or apology for the absolute horrors of the Holocaust, and a way to actually kind of absolve European nations from their responsibility for the role that they played in it and responsibility for the role of helping the Jewish people. And there was racism strung through it, anti-Palestinian racism strung through its creation from the very beginning. And so we're going to move on a little bit further into history.
Yeah, and it did not start October 7th. I think that's what it seems like a lot of the media is so hyper fixated. And whenever you're trying to have a conversation with people about what's happening today, and I've had several conversations both at work and outside of work, people are intent that this started on October 7th. And so what we're seeing with this disproportionate use of power and weaponry and the genocide that's happening now is deserved because it started October 7th. And so obviously, if you're looking at history and the historical facts, a lot of Palestinians will tell you it started in 1948, but it started way before that, kind of with the British and the planning of the British and the Balfour Agreement. But Palestinians weren't consulted in any of it, right? The Jewish homeland became Palestine, and the slogan was a land for a people without a land. And oftentimes you hear people saying too that it was a desert. It was a place that wasn't established. There was no cities. There was nothing there. And there are so many pictures that prove that pre-1948, Palestine was a beautiful metropolis. And it was a coveted land because it was a land full of both natural resources and a lot of other things as well. And we'll try to sell it as if this became a Muslims against Jews kind of war, and we needed to establish a place for the Jewish people to live. But if you go, and I think that's one of the most beautiful things, that the first time I had the privilege of visiting Palestine, and if you walk into Jerusalem, the actual land, the buildings that are there are a symbol of the harmony that has historically existed in Palestine, because in a few step radius, you are literally next to Masjid al-Aqsa, which is the holy relic of the Palestinians, of the building of the Palestinians, the mosque. And then a few steps away from that is the Sepulchre Church. And then a few steps away from that is the Wailing Wall. And so you're like literally in steps away from all these beautiful religious symbols that have always existed side by side, right? Like one group of people did not come and destroy the other in order to make space for themselves. The harmony's always been there. So this has never been a religious war. Palestinians objected to being displaced and had tried everything in every form of peaceful resistance. They came to the table. At one point, they even agreed to a two-state solution in 1947 that gave Israel 56% of the land and Palestinians 43% of the land. But if we go to the next slide, we can see that that didn't even hold true, right? Even they're kind of giving up certain things in order to have peace and make it work. If you look at the picture, and I think the picture says it all, the first picture is a map of Palestine before 1948, and then 1948 is when the land was divided for a two-state solution. So the little gold part is what was considered Palestine. That tiny little strip on the corner is Gaza, and the red is what is considered Israel. Today, those little specks of gold are currently considered Palestinian territories, and Palestine has almost been completely erased. And that is probably not looking at the fact that just in the last month alone, entire cities in the West Bank, entire villages in the West Bank have been completely taken over by settlers, and more people have been displaced. We already know what's happening in Gaza, but the West Bank is not getting any attention. So I would wager that those little gold specks are feeling a lot smaller today than they did a month ago. In 1948, and that's where my family's history, goes back to my grandfather, who was 90 years old. We grew up listening to his stories. He was 15 when 1948 happened, and when our village, the first village to be massacred, Deir Yassin, and he was one of the few survivors. He walked over his own brother's carcasses and saved two of his youngest sisters as he walked for days and was separated from his family. And that was the story, and there's 750,000 stories that are similar, but that's where our family's history kind of started, and it was the first time we were displaced because we would be displaced again in 1967. That day is known as the Nakba. It was a catastrophe because people thought that they would eventually be able to go back. And so my grandfather held on to the key of his family's home, the land that they had for centuries, the olive trees, the groves. And he talks about, there's a deep connection to Palestinians with their land and the natural resources that come from that land. And so when they left in 1948, they thought that they would eventually it would be a time before they would be able to go back. But my grandfather's 90, it's been 75 years. I don't think that he'll see a free Palestine in his time. I hope that this is the impetus of something bigger, but it feels like it's going to take longer than that. And so 750,000 people in 1948 alone were displaced from their families, and that was considered a catastrophe. When neighboring countries tried to intervene, the first Arab-Israeli war broke out. Israel won and ended up with 78% of Palestine at that point. And then in 1967, it was a 6-day war where many of those same Palestinians that were displaced in 1948 were displaced yet again. My parents were part of that displacement in 1967, which is how we ended up here in the United States. And they were pushed into whatever was left with the Palestinian territories. So many of the people that are in Gaza now who are being displaced again are people who were displaced in 1948, people who were displaced again in 1967, and people who have been under siege in an open-air concentration camp for 15 years with no electricity, no water, and no quality of life whatsoever. So this definitely didn't start on October 7th. It started way, way before. And I think when we're having conversations and trying to justify or dehumanize or blame or create a big monster and say this is the fault of this big monster, which we won't name, it takes so much away from the history, the long history of endurance, the long history of acceptance, resistance, persistence, all those words that we want to say. The Palestinian people have endured so much and have tried coming to the table with political agreements. They have tried civil disobedience. They have tried peaceful protest. It was just 2 years ago that the people of Gaza were peacefully protesting when they were constantly met with bombing, violence, and terror. And so I think we really need to do a little bit of work when we're engaging in conversations about Palestine, not calling it a conflict. I think conflict really undermines and connotes the idea that there's two equal sides here with two equal powers. The Palestinian people are a people with essentially no real government, no army, no power, no weapons, nothing, right? What they have is what they can make from the little resources that they have in their again, under siege, right? So for us to call it a conflict, I think that in and of itself is a real disservice and is an inaccurate kind of conversation and understanding when it comes to Palestine.
Thank you for that, Sosan. That's such important and devastating history. And, I appreciate you doing the painful work of bringing your story here, because opening up these wounds like this, it is a service and it's something you shouldn't have to do. But so often the stories of Palestinians are erased, and so little thought to how this is impacting Palestinians around the world is given. I want to highlight really quick a comment that Chelsea gave, which I think is just really, shows a lot here, which says, I didn't know about the uneven splits of the land between Palestine and Israel that skewed more in Israel's favor prior to the Nakba. I hate that something like this was obscured and played down when learning about world history in school. And that is how oppression works, right? It is so important that we are kept from this important information. And so we're trying to offer that here and really trying to let people understand that yes, the world is complicated, but what is happening right now, especially what is happening to Palestinians, is a lot less complicated than people would have you believe. And everything that we know that tells us that oppression is wrong, that occupation is wrong, that apartheid is wrong, we do need to let that guide us as we move forward in talking about what's happening in Palestine.
I think to add to that too, and probably one of the things that we should have prefaced in the very beginning is that no matter how, we can go on for a 10-hour session and not cover everything that needs to be covered in order for us to foster a deep understanding of what's happening in the region in a very complex and long history. Not complex, I feel like that word is an excuse not to engage, but a long history, right? And one that has, even in curriculum, really, like I always say, whenever we think about Palestinians or Arabs and Muslims or Palestine, it often sits in the wrong places in curriculum. And there's so much curriculum violence that really contributes to the misunderstandings and the disinformation that exists around this topic in the real world. And so I think, if anything, we hope that we plant some seeds to really foster for some curiosity for you to go back and really ask some questions, not just about this, but about all the places where in our history, marginalized communities have really been painted with a single story and have been painted out to be. And it's something that I start with my students every single year, the proverb of the lion and the hunter, and the fact that we'll never hear the lion's story, even though he put up a really good fight, but he didn't have the gun, right? It's the hunter who survives. And it's always his story that's glorified and the one that's amplified and elevated. And so really just thinking about that with the context of what we're hearing on the news and with curriculum and with everything else, and the fact that no one conversation or series of conversations or one book is going to give us everything we need on any topic, but it really is necessary for us to be asking critical questions all the time and teaching our kids and our students and our own families to be asking those questions, because historically that hasn't been the case.
There's a lot of love for your phrase of curriculum violence in the chat. Maybe love is the wrong word, but resonance, a lot of resonance with that. I think you've offered something really powerful for people to take away. And I just want to mention that we are planning to do a follow-up to this that's more focused on pedagogy and curriculum and how to facilitate conversations with students around everything that's happening. But for now, we're going to at least begin that with talking about what is the impact of not elevating the Palestinian voice and narrative and experiences in schools. And then where do we start? Like, where can we just begin that? And so maybe, Joe, you can kick us off with that piece.
Yeah, for sure. When I think about what happens if we don't talk about it, and what happens if we don't talk about it intentionally in elevating the narrative, the experience of Palestinian people, people are erased, right? Like, they're erased from the experience, they're erased from the presence, they're erased from history, right? And when folks' stories are not being told, it is much easier to dehumanize them or not even be aware of the dehumanization that's existing. And that makes it even easier for you when it's time for you to decide, when someone asks you your opinion or your vote or your perspective, when you say you don't know, and that impact continues, right? And it allows to maintain this current state of dehumanization, right? And then let's add to that, that affects our ability to dehumanize others, right? When we don't know about the dehumanization of one group, or we justify that, or don't know about it, it's easier for other folks to catch that, right? Just like Dr. Jaber said earlier, right? It's going to be somebody else's turn later, right? It was somebody else's turn in 2020. It was somebody's turn in 2021, right? So that continues. The other piece is it affects us too, right? When we don't elevate, when we're not mindful and intentional about who we're leaning into, who we're centering in the conversation, and we support dehumanization, we dehumanize ourselves, right? That affects us as participants, as witnesses, right? And we lose a part of our humanity. Sometimes we think that this is a neutral process, right? But if you don't stand up for other people's humanity, you're not believing that humanity matters. That's a part of you that you're losing, right? And we know that, which is why we want to lean into the conversation. And then ultimately, like if we're not fighting for the freedom of everyone, then we're not free. You can't call that freedom if everybody's not free. And I saw this beautiful quote from Kwame Ture, who was talking about whether it's about peace or liberation, right? And he was saying, no, it's not about peace, right? And I think about being a kid and hearing peace in the Middle East as a kid, right? And this idea of like, his quote was, you can have peace and slavery. That's peaceful in some way, right? And he said, it's not about that. It's about liberation, right? So it's clear that we know what we're working from so that we can know what we're working to, right? So that's what the cost is, right? When we talk about what the methods and measures that are being added to us for us not to talk about it, we want to lift that up too, right? As I do my work as a consultant now and trainer, when I hold space to have this conversation just in the last month, every time I've had a conversation with educators, whether they're educators, leaders, central office folks, whatever that is, every time folks are saying, this is the first time we're talking about this. Every time, coast to coast. This is the first time that we're talking about this, right? And there's a little bit of hesitancy. You throw a picture up, you throw a question up, all of a sudden, it's a mic drop moment. All of a sudden, it gets real tense, right? And I'm like, okay, cool, we're in it, right? And then we move through it. And then after we have a little bit of time to process, folks are just like, I appreciate you holding space for that because we haven't been able to talk about it yet. I got a message that says we're not supposed to talk about it. I got an email. I got a reprimand, whatever that is, right? People are literally today, people said, but my students are asking for the conversation, right? The students are saying, hey, what's going on? And then a great comment just today, someone said, and they're not just asking for space, they're asking for clarity. They're asking for guidance. And who are they looking to for guidance and clarity? The adults, right? And their peers, of course, right? Now this piece around how do we start and where do we start? We got to start with humanity and dignity. That's got to be the start, right? Because then we could talk about a lack of that, right? We got to start with self, right? We can't go out. We got to go in. We got to do a lot of mirror work. We talked about terminology and history already. We got to start with questions, right? For me, like I'm not working with a full deck around knowing the extensive history of what's going on in the Middle East, but I know I need to learn something, right? I know I need to read some stuff and ask some people and trust some first person folks and primary sources before I engage in a conversation. So that's got to be the process, right? Questions and answers. But when we talk about the how also, let's sit in a circle. We can't do this process with a PowerPoint, right? Or if we talk about doing this with young people, with adults in the same space, right? That can't be a lecture, right? Let's sit in a circle. Let's have some conversation. If folks are familiar with restorative justice and restorative practices, let's have a restorative circle, a community building restorative circle around how that's impacting us, right? And we got to be prepared to facilitate too, though. You can't just open the space and not know what we're going to do with it, right? So as Shane said, there'll be some time in the future. I'm working on a resource that I'll throw on my website and add to it around how do we hold space? What questions do we ask? What's the order of things, right? We want to be prepared for that too. But what's at stake is the future, right? Or we're going to repeat this. It'll be my time again when I'm going to be asking for some help, right? And, I'm here because at some point I connected with Dr. Jaber and she stood up with me in some times. And I was like, well, it's time for me to stand up too, right? So I appreciate the opportunity to be in solidarity. And I'm going to pass it back to you. I'm so signed to also share what's at stake and how do we start?
Yeah, I'm going to also say that it's really, really important for us to I know that schools are constantly pushing the narrative of cultural responsiveness. And so this is not just important work for your Palestinian students to be able to see themselves accurately reflected. It's important for every student to be engaging in these conversations because these kids are going out, they're voting, they're making choices. It's interesting because I feel like when it comes to education, oftentimes as a teacher and as an educator of 25 years, we always hear the field of education being criticized. And, I even recall always when I wanted to be a teacher, my mom cried for days because I was the first person in my family to go to college. And she was so disappointed that I wanted to be a teacher But I think with time, she sees that we are the ones that are crafting the presidents, and we're the ones that are crafting the lawyers, and we're the ones that are crafting the doctors and the engineers and the politicians, and they all sat in a classroom first. And so it's so important for us to really think about the value and the power that sits in a school space, and the importance of ensuring that we are really shaping global citizens. You don't have to be physically in a space to engage with the world anymore. And whether we like it or not, our kids are so much more aware than we were in our time, because the world is at their fingertips. And so they're engaging with it, and they are aware of it. And for us to act like similes and metaphors and matter on any given day, when they're experiencing so much of the world in real time, and that becomes the premise, the world becomes the text, right? We ask the critical questions, we teach rhetorical skills, we teach the power of writing, we teach all of these things that we teach in the context of the world. And it becomes so much more meaningful, because this knowledge then becomes a conduit to literacy, deliberation. It becomes healing, right? Because education is a healing work. If we're using it properly, it can be also work that breaks and damages and destroys, right? But it can be a weapon. I always say it can be a weapon, and it can be a tool, and it can be a place where we actually heal. And I think I always say, as a parent, you kiss your children and you send them off to school, and you don't know if they're going to come home to you anymore. Like, that's the reality of the world that we're living in. And so much of it is foreign, not just when it comes to like this issue with Palestine. This isn't the problem. This is the symptom of a larger problem, right? Because again, we've been here before, and we'll be here again with a different group of people with a different face. I think the bigger issue is that we have normalized this idea of elevating fear, to bring people to the ballots, of elevating fear to preserve a status quo, of elevating fear for a lot of reasons, because there's a benefit in elevating fear. And so schools have to be doing the opposite and really countering that fear. And the only way to counter that is through education and understanding, and really centering and being explicit in teaching empathy, and getting kids to sit in circle, humanizing each other, and valuing the diversity that exists in our world, not just in our schools and not just in our communities, but larger than that, because we have access to the world. And so I think that has to be the work that we're doing. And if we're not channeling every single curricular subject that we're teaching in doing that work, whether it is media literacy, whether it is the sciences, and we're looking at environmental violence, or looking at how the environment has even been used to marginalize, manipulate, and control people with resources, right? And so much of that is at the heart of why these wars exist altogether. Just really thinking about these things in deep and authentic ways that are going to get kids to ask the questions. And when they become the leaders of tomorrow, they're able to come from a place of informed practice, of critical consciousness, of awareness, and not the fear that forces us to lose our rationale and really act from a place of fear. And that's the scary world that we're living in today. We're seeing that in real time. What happens when people don't think, but fear drives all of our decisions? That's what we're seeing. And so the only way for us to really eliminate that fear is by understanding and educating and getting kids to ask the right questions. But before we can do any of that work, it has to start with ourselves, right? Because I think I've seen time and time again what I call well-intentioned harmful impact, where teachers think that they're doing the right thing and they're walking into these spaces before they've done the work. And what they do is cause more harm than they do actually heal and do the work. So it starts with yourself, but it can't stay there. It's the same question I always ask my students. Now that you know, what are you going to do with what you know? It's time for us to change and act. We can't just sit back in silence anymore. Our silence has gotten us here. Our silence has allowed marginalization of the Black community to continue for 400 years. It's allowed our Indigenous population to be completely erased and to have a life expectancy as we speak today of 40. Shame on us for allowing those things to happen. It's about time that we act for the sake of humanity, and because I want to believe that there's a better world for my grandchildren. I have to believe that. And so everything that I do is to that end. So I hope that we can really see the power of schools to really either elevate these narratives or really dismantle and disrupt them.
I'd love to add a little to that too, and thank you. That was so beautiful and I think helpful. There's so many educators in here. Some things I want to add too for people who are right now saying, like, what can I be doing absolutely right now? One is to actually protect our students. A lot of our students are on the front line of activism right now and are being heavily targeted, especially our college students. So we are seeing student groups being disbanded and banned. We're seeing students being kicked out. We're seeing students being called terrorists for simply protesting to end this genocide and to free Palestine. And it is really important that any institution local to you or anywhere in your country knows that they're going to hear from you if they're targeting our young people and trying to silence their voices. It's vital that we stand with young people and that we stand with educators who are trying to make sure that our young people are empowered. It's also really important to remember that things, like BDS work, boycott, divest, sanction. It worked in South Africa. It will absolutely work with Israel. And that's part of the reason why so many municipalities have been trying to make BDS movements illegal, because they are truly afraid of it. And I will say, if you want to know what will guide your immediate actions, look at where the pushback is. It is important to remember, just like in 2020, we will see a strong pushback to what we're doing. And the answer then is not to shrink away, because they're hoping that we will think the cost is too high. But they'll be waiting for us anytime we do this. So actually let where they're pushing back guide us and help us know, oh, this is where they're really afraid. And they are very afraid of our young people. They're very afraid of our economic impact. They're very afraid that we will be boycotting these spaces. And, these are the types of things that can really guide us towards victory. So please look these things up. Please invite people to join you. It's really important to remember, too, that a lot of the repercussions that people face for speaking out exist because people don't speak out. This is a self-fulfilling type thing. So studies have shown time and time again, the more privilege you have, the less you pay for speaking out. And yet, those who are most privileged are least likely to speak out. And it's the people who have the most to lose that end up carrying the brunt of this. But because of that, it means that our politicians, our leaders, our business owners can paint us as having a fringe position and say, oh, well, look at them. They're so radical. They're dangerous. We have to fire them. We have to remove them from their post. We have to kick them out of their school. And even though studies have shown the majority of people agree that this needs to stop, if they're not speaking out, then it gives credence to this lie that we are dangerous extremists instead of sharing the opinion that the majority of people have. And so please speak out. Every time you speak out, you will give other people permission to do the same. Share what you're doing. Share what you're boycotting. Share what meetings you're attending. Share the school board meetings you're going to. Share the letters that you're writing. And you'll be surprised at the courage that your community will suddenly have to join you.
Find your allies. Find your allies. There are so many people that are there who are on the right side of history but scared to speak up. Find your allies. There's power in numbers. And if you are in an educational institution that really is silencing, you have power and locus of control in your local communities where your kids go to school. Make changes there, right? Like, we are parts of communities, and we often exist as part of numerous communities. And so find your allies and speak up in your local communities. We have been trying in our local community to change in our Board of Education in a district that serves the largest Palestinian community in the whole entire country right now. And that has been an uphill battle, but we're not giving up until we see change. So find your allies. If you can't speak at work, speak in different spaces, but show up. And we're not done yet. So I know it sounds like we're kind of wrapping up, but we have a group of student activists who are also going to be joining us, and an artist who's also going to be joining us. We're hoping that you hold on for another half hour to hear from the youth and kind of their experiences in this as well.
Shall I bring them in?
Or if they're here, yeah, let's do that.
All right.
Beautiful ladies that are here with us tonight that are just going to drop some golden nuggets for all of us to hear and take in. Do you guys want to start by introducing yourselves first and kind of telling us your why? Why are you here? Where are you from? How do you identify? What's important to you? Whatever you want to share about yourself. We can start with maybe Jinan.
Yes, hello everyone. First, thank you all so much for inviting me to this space. I think it's so important that we're having these conversations, not only in organizing spaces, but between teachers, right? Educators. My name is Jinan. Again, I was born and raised in Chicago, specifically Little Palestine, Ridgeview. I went to DePaul for undergrad and was president of SJP there, and also founded SJP Chicago and was chair of SJP Chicago. And then I went on to Georgetown Law, and I'm a recent graduate from Georgetown Law. So practicing attorney, I guess, as weird as that sounds. But I also founded the LSJP there. And oh, by the way, SJP is Students for Justice in Palestine. For those who don't know, they're the students organizing on the ground every single day to not only change public conscience, but put pressure on these institutions and politicians to create change as well. And why I'm here, I guess, why we're all here, it's like these conversations are more important now than ever. If we're not talking about like the censoring of students and the humanizing of Palestinians now, then when are we going to do it? And yeah, I'll just leave it there before I get into it too much and let Dina and Medak go.
Medak, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi everyone. My name is Medak. I'm actually a Palestinian-born American, but I have felt that has always been the biggest paradox since I was consciously aware of the ethnic cleansing of my own people. I was president for 2 years of my school's chapter of SJP as well. However, my why is also related to what Subson had said earlier, because if you didn't know, she's my cousin. So all our stories are very tied together. But I also believe that Palestinians are known for their resilience and bravery, and I don't believe I can call myself a Palestinian if I'm unable to carry out those values of my people. So I wholeheartedly believe that it is important now than ever to ensure that we preserve our stories and histories as a testament to maintaining our identities. So that's what has been my whys ever since I was consciously aware.
Thank you, Medak. Lena?
Hello everyone, my name is Lena. I'm a freshman in college right now. I go to DePaul University, also on SJP. Not president yet, but soon inshallah. And my why is because as a Palestinian, I feel I have a duty to speak up since I feel the whole world is against us. And it's just, we're not spoken up for, we're not ever brought up in any conversation in school. So it is a duty to inform other teachers, especially on how they can help and what it's like from a student's point of view.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you. Shane, do you want to go with the first question for the ladies? You're muted.
All right. Thank you all so much for being here. We're really, really thrilled to have you. Can you talk about what does it mean to be a Palestinian youth in America today? What your experiences are?
I can start. For me, every time I'm asked that question, I can't help but focus on the generational trauma and how it has impacted me in the way I carry myself in any environment that I've been a part of. Growing up, I've often had difficulty finding myself belonging in America because it always felt like my heart was tied to my homeland, even though I immigrated here while I was really young. However, one thing I will say is I've always unapologetically embraced my Palestinian identity as I've been attending protests since I was a kid. I constantly ask about my family's history. But I believe I made the biggest impact, like I said, when I became president, and I held that presidential role since I was an undergrad in SJP. And I think that more than ever has helped change the societal view in my school's environment specifically, because it was never talked about. And I know I held a great role there just because I've heard it from my peers. But other than that, that's my take on that.
Thank you, Medak.
Yeah, I think I can go next. It's interesting that you asked this question now, and I think, yeah, I apologize if I'm incoherent or emotional, but like right before I joined this call, we received news that Al-Shifa Hospital was being raided by occupation forces, and obviously this is one of the biggest hospitals in Gaza that houses 30,000 injured people at this point, or even more. So I think when you talk about what it means to be like Palestinian or Arab at this time, it means constantly mourning. Like we're actually like constantly mourning and devastated by what's going on. But with that, also having to always be reactive and to explain ourselves, like why we are deserving of humanity, why people should care, why the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians is wrong. So again, it's just like that constant, like you're exhausted, but you also have to explain. You have a duty to our people back home to like highlight and shed light about what's going on. So it's like so many different layers. Again, it's like the exhaustion part. The organizing part, again, I think this is my 7th meeting of the day, and I have one right after this, of trying to, like, doing all we can to organize with our people, to get our voices heard in schools and institutions everywhere, because this is literally life or death for our people. So there's that aspect. And then not only are we fighting this constant exhaustion, this battle against these what's going on, also organizing with our communities, it's also the censorship that we face. When I remember my very first year at DePaul, I wasn't even like president then or anything like that. I got put on Canary Mission. And for those who don't know, Canary Mission is a blacklist site of literally puts all your information, your picture, even for some people, their personal address, their personal information, and accuses them of terrorism. So people have lost their jobs because of this. People have been doxxed. Just this past month alone, Palestine Legal has received over 400 cases of doxing, termination of employment, everything from A to Z. This is not for anything extreme, simply for speaking out for Palestinian rights, for saying ethnic cleansing is wrong. Offers has been rescinded, doxing, and yet students continue to show up. People continue to show up across the city in protests in masses. Just on Sunday, we had a protest of about 8,000 people in Chicago, and this is our 10th protest in the city. So what does it mean to be an Arab and a Palestinian right now? It means constantly fighting for your people, but also fighting for yourself, against these like institutions that have been built literally to suppress our voices. So I guess that's a very quick synopsis, but I'm sorry if I got emotional or that was incoherent. But again, we're in this constant reactive mourning phase that we're not able to get out of, but we're also expected to like form a coherent thought sometimes. It's like, I'm seeing my family like die, like our people are dying. I don't know if I can get a coherent thought out. So yeah, Lena, I'll let you go ahead.
Hey, thank you. You've nothing to apologize for. That was really beautiful. And I just take away all the courage that you're mustering, but also all the emotional labor that this takes to stand as a young person and to try to speak and interrupt all the messed up narratives that are out there, and just holding space for you, for all of you, and grateful for your leadership. Thank you so much. Lena, you want to share?
I mean, she kind of took like all the words out of my mouth. I mean, it's like a constant fear. There's constant guilt. There's like a constant feeling that people want to silence you, erase you. I mean, I fear like at DePaul when we're doing anything related to Palestine, we all have to cover our face with masks, in fear of being on Canary Mission, in fear of like getting doxxed. And people have come against us and like with full force, and they're okay with showing their face, because they know that there's nothing like rooting against them. They're okay. And it just kind of sucks of always being in the lower position, and having to fight while also being scared to fight. I mean, I grew up in a community where I had parents coming out to my mom saying, "I kill your people." And when I served in the army, I've had people come up to me. I mean, my mom speaks fluent English. She was born and raised in America. She's Palestinian. And it just annoys me that, like she still gets that type of hatred. And I learned that hatred from a very young age, learning like parents are telling their kids to treat me the same exact way in school. So it's just, constant fear, constant guilt, and then the feeling of being silenced. Yeah, just to summarize.
Lena, I hope you all get to look in the chat. There's just so much love from the community for all of you right now flowing through that chat. So, Sun, you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, I mean, I think we already have a sense of the amazing freedom fighters and strong voices. And I love the fact that you're all women, because it's just an additional like sheroes in this space. I'm so proud of young, strong female voices. What does your activism look like? And what challenges have you faced like in your spaces? I know you've alluded to it somewhat, but like, can you elaborate? Maybe tell some specific stories of what that looks like. Some of your experiences, like Lena, I know we were in the same high school together, and you've had a lot of experiences just being present in that space and being a minority within a minority. So what has that looked like for you?
In high school, I never felt represented unless I pushed for my voice to be out, or unless Dr. Jaber was the one to push something out for my type of people. We were a very small Palestinian community in high school, and the only way our voices were heard was when Dr. Jaber and like started something up. And even then, it felt like sometimes our voices were unheard because it's coming from the same two people that were always fighting for Palestine. When it's not implemented in the curriculum and it's not given by other people that aren't Palestinian, people are just like, oh, like here they go again, like them speaking about their own country. It needs to be coming from people of all types of cultures and all types of identities. And even now in college, I have a class where I spoke about Palestine in front of my Zionist teacher. And I was very scared to do it, knowing the consequences there. But I did it anyway. And I'm very glad I did it because a lot of students were coming up to me and saying, thank you for doing it. Like, they don't want to be bystanders anymore. They want to go out and learn. And I'm so glad I did it. It's just the feedback I got back from the teacher and worrying about my grade, like my future, my grade, my GPA is all in her hands right now. And, you know, like she expressed to me that she has family IDF and how she's scared for them. And I think it's really inconsiderate that she does that stuff knowing I'm Palestinian. And she asked me if I was Palestinian before saying that. So it's just, it's a lot to take in. But yeah, I just wish there was more from all types of voices instead of the same people. Because when it does come from the same people, it's just people rolling their eyes saying it's the same people again. So there definitely needs to be different point of views all fighting for the same thing.
Anak or Junan?
I guess I can go next. So I actually took an executive role all 5 years at my time at Illinois Tech. My first 3 years I was public relations chair, but then my last 2 years I was the president of SJP. But ever since I was a freshman, there's this one thing that has carried on all 5 years, and it was to get the Palestinian flag hung up in our institution. And it's because our school has this one building, has all the flags just lined up of any country you could probably think of. But of course, the flag of the oppressor was there, but not the oppressed. I just remember, like, we had let out written statements to our administration, signed petitions. We even presented ourselves in front of the student government association at our university. And I think it was my freshman year, we had gone to the Office of Campus Life Coordinator and were promised that it would be up by the next year. They eventually left their position, and so we had to start over from scratch. Then COVID took over, so they just neglected the issue, but we kept fighting for it. And then the year I became president, my 4th year, I had worked with the new Office of Campus Life Coordinator, and we were getting a new president at the time for our institution, and we were like, oh, they're changing out the flags. We promise it's going to be up this time. We promise. I talked to the person that was in charge of this. It'll be up. And she emails me the next day and is like, okay, you could go check it out. Should be up there. I take the secretary with me. We walk up and down this hall. I kid you not, 3 times. We're like, oh, is that the flag? No, it's just the Jordanian flag. Oh, is that the flag? No, it's Sudan. Like, no, it was nowhere to be found. So we let out a new, we wrote back, and they claimed that they used a list from what the U.S. recognizes as countries, not what the UN recognizes. And if you don't know, most countries of the UN does recognize Palestine as a country. And I've been in touch with my current exec, and it's still an ongoing issue that they've been trying to fight. In my last year, I remember we were talking to, I think it was like the directive coordinator. He eventually left office, so it didn't matter anyway. But he was like, well, what if the alternative is just to take down all the flags? We're like, what is the problem with putting up the Palestinian flag? And it eventually got to the president, and the president told us it's because they receive federal funding from obviously from the government, and they didn't want to risk losing that federal funding just by putting up a flag. So if that doesn't show how much that we are silenced in terms of our voices, I don't know what will, because our school loves to bank on the idea of diversity and how much it makes a successful institution. That in itself just angered all the student body. Even here now that I'm obtaining a PhD in a whole nother state in Virginia, I've never seen so many anti-Palestinian comments being made in an email than what I've seen here. And I've been trying so hard to get in touch with the Palestinian organization on campus here, but it's not the same as it was in Chicago. So I'm still working that out. But it is ridiculous as to the lengths that some universities will go to silence our voices and make sure that we are not heard in these settings. But there's obviously other situations, but I just, like, another thing that I was known for during my time as president was that I became known for hosting the biggest like student org-led event at the end of the year, 2 years in a row. Over 250 people, most of which weren't Palestinians. They embraced our culture, they embraced our traditions, they learned about our history at these events. We invited a bunch of like performers and all this stuff, and I got many comments saying, like, this was amazing, like I didn't know anything about this beforehand. So why aren't we being represented if so many people are contributing to learning about it? But that's how much I'll say for now. I'll give it to Jeanette.
Yeah, thank you so much, Manek. I feel like if we all sat down here and said our stories of silencing, we'd be here all day, truly. But I guess just to touch upon a few that again, we deal with this literally every day. I've been on calls for the past week about students who got doxxed or silenced, but more general things. Like, I remember my time at DePaul, there was a professor, a very well-known professor, tenured professor, that called for the carpet bombing of Gaza, said that Muslims are backward and barbaric, and a whole bunch of other things. And we are obviously outraged by this because it created a very unsafe environment on campus, as more as it is right now. And we created a campaign about this, wanted to meet with the president, but yet the administration refused to really stand by us. If anything, they made us seem like the hostile ones for creating protests and campaigns about this and asking administration to take accountability for what's going on. And this professor still continues today at DePaul University, and even goes to my time at Georgetown. We brought Mohammed Al-Kurd. He's a very well-known speaker, journalist, who lived in Sheikh Jarrah, to Georgetown Law. And that in itself, just that event, brought so much protest from Zionists. Like, they personally called my employers, the people that I was going to work for, and told them to fire me, and that I support like terrorism and everything like that. So even now, just a week ago, there was a bus going around with the faces of people on the SJP board, going around campus. So this is something that like students are facing on a daily basis. But this is not to say to like get us like down. Students are very strategic and they're very educated, and they know the risks that they're taking, unfortunately. And that's kind of like the beauty and the strength of students. But what I want to emphasize more so here, that we're talking about Palestinians, we're talking about Arabs, but more so that we've seen right now is our allies that continue and have been stepping up for us. Have you seen, like, at these protests, at these demonstrations or actions, it's no longer only Palestinians or Arabs. It is our Jewish allies. It's people in the Black communities, people in the Latinx community, the immigrant community, because we've all collectively realized, like, literally this time has forced us to all like radicalize and again realize once again that history has repeated itself, and liberation for one means liberation for all. So how can we collectively work together on this? And I think that's where our strength has truly come from, of even like some dangerous protests or actions, like our white allies, our Jewish allies will volunteer to take like the front lines of that. And the same went on for like the Black Lives Matter movement. So I think like that is where our strength lies, of counting on each other. And it's unfortunate that at this time we've kind of, I don't want to say the masks have fallen, but really the masks have fallen in terms of like now people are understanding what it means to like stand for Palestine, even in the most hostile of moments, of their understanding these risks, these doxing, this censorship. But it's really like the courage and being principled to stand by our demands, which is again like an end to the siege on Gaza, and a free Palestine, and really uplifting students that are fighting for their family back home. Like, again, we talk about these statistics of 15,000 Palestinians that have been killed so far. 11,000 Palestinians have been killed. Half of them are children. We say these statistics over and over again, but we kind of you lose the values of these statistics. That each one was a life, each one was a person, a family. Just I think a week ago, I went to Gaza, which for us is a funeral of a person in our community that literally lost 40 members of their family in Gaza. 40 members. Like this is again a constant warning that there is no choice for us but to be on the front lines, but to take these risks. So again, I'm always in awe of the students. Even when I'm part of the students, I'm still in awe of them and like their courage and that they know the risks and they continue to amplify the voices of people back home and the voices of all people under occupation.
Thank you, Jinan. So we have 5 minutes left. We're going to try to get everybody out on time. So maybe we'll do the last question as kind of a lightning round. And the question is, if each of you could share like one thing you really need from, you all are young adults, but the older adults, the educators in the room, that we can do to support you and create conditions for you to continue to lead. What is one thing you would ask of us?
I think just like, and this is like great. Just I was gonna say listening and being open to learning, and this is exactly what this is. There's a lot of misinformation out there when it comes to Palestine, and it's really put out to be a complex topic when it's really not. It's occupied versus the occupier, indigenous people that have their land stolen, and the occupier again. So I think for us, it would be more so like being open to listening and learning from the personal experiences of people that are, again, affected by this.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
I would say for me, our audience is a lot of teachers, correct? Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think there's a lot of teachers.
Mine is mainly for teachers. Dr. Jaber, she held an English class at my high school, and I was never in her class. I took other classes, but everyone that was in that class would come out and tell me, for some reason, the only other hijabi that spoke to her, that like her class isn't an English class, it's an identity class where they discover themselves. And every time they would tell me that, I'd be more in awe of her because no one else in the school was doing that. And that's what we need to be doing. We need to be teaching younger children, our future, what's going on in the world, current events, what's been happening, not the same thing that we've been learning since middle school. And to also spread that information around, like even someone said in the comments, I really liked it, at your own dinner table. Kids talk like crazy. You need to be able to spread the information to your kids. I mean, just like those people that were against my mom spread it to their kids and gave me the same hate at school, we could spread the love to your kids, and those kids can spread the love to the people in their classes. I mean, like a few words mean the world to people. And another thing is, you can't always rely on the one Palestinian kid or the one Muslim kid in your class to say something. I mean, in high school for me, freshman year, when the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was brought up, my teacher kept fact-checking with me, and that unit was one day. And the fact that they kept fact-checking with me really bothered me, because what if I wasn't in that class? Would we be skipping over it? Would be giving out like false information? Right. So 100% do your research, and respectfully, I mean that, and spread the positivity and love.
Thank you, Lena. Malak, can you take us home?
I think my peers pretty much covered up most of what I was going to say, but I will say finding those professors at your universities that do, like, I'm not saying that just go to those and those who do support the cause, but more or less have them be the voices to their peers, because they're not going to listen to us as students half the time. You could try, but most of, like, I had a professor that I asked him to be the advisor for SJP, and after I did that, he was very involved in the arts, and he was an Egyptian professor, not even Palestinian. But after I educated him like properly, not that to say he didn't know, but more or less he started spreading out all the events to all his peers and all his colleagues, and so that helped spread the word even more. And I started seeing a lot of the older generation being invited into our events, especially the ones that weren't during the lunch hours. So that alone can cause, I'm a big advocate for the domino effect, by the way. So like one person can create a whole impact. And like Selson was saying, or sorry, Dr. Javed was saying earlier, it's more or less, there is strength in numbers. So the more you're able to create your impact, the stronger your allies become. So that's what I think.
I love you ladies so very, very much. You make your ancestors proud. You make your parents proud. You make us proud. I can't say enough about like just the example that you've set for so many of us in this space. And you're so young and so much stronger than I ever was when I was your age. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your feelings, your thoughts, and yourselves with us.
Thank you for opening up this space. This has been very, I think, healing just for me, especially today.
I think we're going to close it down. Do we want to drop any links in the chat now for people to kind of keep learning and reading and growing?
Yeah, we can definitely do that. And I also want to make sure everyone knows, we got a lot of questions, people coming in at multiple times, that we will be sending out a recording of this to everyone who registered. So a lot of people registered with the understanding they wouldn't be able to make it live. And I want to add my thanks as well to everyone who joined. It's been beautiful, healing, and educating for me as well. And so Salam, thank you for putting this together and for honoring us with the invitation to join you in this really important conversation. I'm proud to be in community with you, to be in family with you. And we will be dropping some links in comments. And also we will be looking through comments for future installments for, burning questions that people had that we didn't get a chance to address. Because there's really, as Susan said, we could talk about this for weeks and weeks and weeks and still not cover everything that needs to be said.
Yeah, we will be back.
We'll be back.
And in the meantime, now that you know, what are you going to do with what you know? We're going to send you with that charge, right? We can't sit on this. I hope everybody takes something away that they can actually do something with.
Use your voice. Don't be afraid to speak up. The louder we are together, the less things can be distorted, right? And those that we most care about can be harmed. So thank you all for being here. Much love to the community.
Joe, you got to close us off.
Oh man, just keep fighting, stay strong, stay connected, believe in yourself. Love yourself, love others. Be well.
Have a great night, everybody. Thank you.